Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
I'm Bill Dries with the Daily Memphian. This is one in a series of podcast interviews for our stories marking 50 years since the start of Plan Z busing for the racial integration of what was then Memphis City Schools. We are joined by Dr. O.Z. Stevens, who in 1973 was director of the school system's Division of Research and Planning. He led the team that came up with several scenarios for federal Judge Robert McRae to consider, including Plan A and what became known as Plan Z, the two plans McRae ordered implemented by the school system starting in January 1973 with Plan A and then Plan Z in August of that year. Dr. Stevens, let's start with the long view. 50 years later, did busing, Plans A and Z, do what they were supposed to do, or did this kind of take on a life of its own, do you think?
Well, it's one thing it did. It met the school system in implementing Plan Z, met its constitutional requirement to desegregate the school system. So it accomplished that. As far as improving the quality of education, I'm not sure that it did. I'm also not sure that it didn't. Mm-hmm. But the only thing we know that it did, it probably produced the largest segregated school system in the South at that time, and that was the Memphis private and parochial school system. Every Baptist and other denomination churches opened their doors, started schools, and white kids simply did not get on the buses to go to their assignment at a formerly black school. So the school system met its constitutional requirement to desegregate.
Mm-hmm. Did you or could anyone have foreseen the white flight to the degree that it happened? Do you think?
Absolutely. In fact, I did a study. I don't know whether you can see this.
I think, yes, this is the one that I've read about in Marcus Pullman's book from 1976, right?
I don't know. I did not know it was. This is induced desegregation.
Okay.
Its effects on white pupil population and resegregation in the Memphis City school system. Mm-hmm. And this case, I did this study. Memphis was but a brief history.
Okay.
We in the early 70s had not done very much towards mixing the races in the city of Memphis, nor had any other Southern school system. But when the Charlotte-Mecklenburg case came down and the Supreme Court ruled that transportation could be used as a means to desegregate the school systems, that's when the plaintiffs in our case went back to court. Judge McRae got us all together and said we had to come up with a plan that met the tenets of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg case, and that is transportation. And you couldn't use white flight as a reason to not desegregate. And so I took over a 3-year period after the implementation of Plan Z, did this study where I attempted to project what the racial composition of the school system would be. And I did it by individual schools. And at the end of that 3-year period, I was right on the money. I hit almost every one of them with a margin of error of less than 5%. Mm-hmm. So it was very, very predictable what was going to happen. The Board of Education changed shortly after that when we had the elected 9-member board, and I got the message real quick that they did not want any more studies released like I had just released. And I did it on my own. I had the permission of nobody to do it, not the superintendent, not the board. And it caused some sort of a controversy. Mm-hmm. What it did do is I got hooked up with Dr. James Coleman, who did the infamous Coleman Report, professor out of the University of Chicago. He and I appeared at several court hearings on systems going through desegregation as expert witness on white flight. And almost every one of them, we were not allowed to testify because, again, white flight was not a reason to not be about doing your constitutional duty to desegregate your school system.
Mm-hmm. Was there a way that you saw to do this that would have avoided white flight, even though the Charlotte-Mecklenburg court ruling said you couldn't take that into account? Was there a way to do it?
No, I don't think so. The white kids in the city of Memphis, and they were no different than they were in Dallas, Texas, or Nashville, or other southern school systems. The white kids were simply not going to get on the bus, and the religious entities in those cities opened their sanctuaries and their classrooms and started schools. I don't know. At one time I knew, but I don't know. I don't remember how many schools in Memphis, how many churches in Memphis started schools. Some of them for only grades 1, 2, 3. Some of them for the full complement of elementary grades. A few of them for high schools. Mm-hmm. I don't think so. They simply weren't going to get on the bus. Mm-hmm. And there was.
Go ahead.
That's all.
Okay. All right. Did Judge McCray change some of the details of the plans you presented before the buses started rolling? Were there tweaks here and there in how it was carried out?
I had a great relationship with the judge. I was put in the enviable or unenviable, I don't know which, position of being what he called a witness for the court. Now, here I was paid by the Memphis Board of Education on the staff. My most immediate superior was John Freeman, the superintendent. And the judge designated me as a witness for the court. So there were several times that I would get a phone call from his office, and he would ask me a question about one of the plans, or what did we mean about such and such a school, or a satellite area that we were transporting somewhere. And they were just questions like that. And I maybe took 3 or 4 calls from him, but he never really meddled. He pretty much accepted. He had a choice. For every plan that the Board of Education submitted, the plaintiff was also submitting a plan. Mm. And they had their expert witnesses. I don't recall exactly who they were. One time I remembered him well, but he could have accepted their plans, although we finally ran out of white kids in our plans to desegregate every school. So their plans had at least one black kid in every white school and one white kid in every black school. But he didn't meddle much that I recall.
Right. From what I've read, the integration of school faculties began in advance of busing. What was the reaction of teachers to integrating the faculties?
Let me tell you, before I get there, let me tell you a story about desegregation of the faculty. Well, first of all, there was a plan. No, let me tell you the story of Judge McCray. I got a call one day. I had retired from the Board of Education and from my job, and was in the private sector. And I got a call one day from it's on the tip of my tongue, and Kay Pittman Black.
Okay, a reporter with the Press Scimitar.
With the Press Scimitar. Mm-hmm. But she had inroads with the judge, and and was sort of a confidant. And she called me and wanted to know if I could go with her to meet Judge McRae for lunch one day, that he had some questions he wanted to ask me, inasmuch as he was writing a book about the school desegregation case, which he did, and which is now a few copies are still in the public libraries. I don't know whether you've read that book or seen the book.
I have. Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yes.
Okay. And so we met in Midtown, and I forget the name of the cafeteria of the restaurant. But one thing he said that I will never forget. He was very, very angry at the Board of Education and the early litigation that was going on, particularly about desegregation of faculties. And he really resented the fact and was upset that the Board of Education chose to litigate the desegregation of the faculties. He said that was an easy one for him. You know, they could have done that, as they eventually were ordered to do, and they wouldn't do it. And he was the inference was I could have probably been a little easier on them in later litigation if I could have seen where they were willing to take even the initial step to desegregate faculties, but they wouldn't do it. They wanted me to make them do it. And so the initial proposal for desegregation of faculties was had to be one crossover teacher in the opposite race school. For example, I had a sister who taught at Treadwell High School, and she was one of the first crossover teachers, and she went, I think, was to Chicago Park.
Okay. In Memphis.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then a black teacher from Chicago Park would go to Treadwell. And she told me recently that there were six teachers from Treadwell that had that crossover assignment. But they asked for volunteers, and my sister volunteered. And the proviso was after 1 year, you got to go back to your original school. And she wanted to go back to Treadwell, and she did go back to Treadwell. But I don't recall any big insurrection, or the teachers did what they were assigned to do. Right. Now they may have lost some teachers. I don't know. I was not in any local school at that time. My brother was a teacher. My sister was a teacher. My father was a retired teacher. I had aunts and uncles and cousins that were teaching in the school system, but I don't recall any. There may have been, but I was not aware of it.
Right. And as part of this series, I've talked to a teacher who was among those teachers who made that transition in those years, and she went. And my memory is failing now on the school. She went from Tech to Melrose High School,
right,
and was taught business classes at both places. And said it went very smoothly. That the transition was pretty seamless to her.
My sister said that she had no problems at her new assignment. That had a very supportive principal and was welcomed by the staff. Again, I can only speak about family members that I had several, but they did not. My brother ended up at Leicester. He had been, I think, out at Tresvant Junior High, and he went to Tresvant.
Right.
I mean, he went to Leicester.
Okay. Tresvant to Leicester. Okay. In looking at Plan A and Plan Z, there were some schools that the decision was made to close them. How did that decision take place, and was that part of the court saying you've got to do that, or was this just the way things wound up once the numbers were in place?
I think more than anything, it gave the Board of Education an opportunity to walk away from some old, decrepit buildings and move kids into nicer facilities. And that was not without controversy, however. I remember we wanted to close a school in the southwest area of the county, and this had been annexed at the time. And it was a little old frame school called Weaver Elementary. And those folks out there came unglued. The area superintendent, Callie Stevens, was very, very opposed to that. Carl Johnson, a member of the Board of Education, was very, very opposed to it. We closed Jeter. We closed, as a high school, we finally closed Weaver. We closed Lester. We closed Lester as a high school.
Mm-hmm.
There were several that we closed, but it was good economics to do it. They were going to be under capacity. Upkeep was significant, but the folks in the neighborhood that the school served weren't happy with us.
Sure, and we should say that regardless of what was happening in 1973, from my years of covering the school system and education in general, it's one of the most controversial things that a school system leaders can set about deciding.
Another one I remember was Douglas High School.
Okay,
Douglas High School, and golly, that's an old established area of the city that take great pride in the Douglas community, and they did not like that decision.
Right. And even after Douglas was closed, the leaders in that community kept pushing for the return of Douglas, and a new Douglas was built, I think, decades later.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So when white kids didn't go to the predominantly black schools that they were assigned to under busing, did that kind of lead to some further closings down the line in those communities?
It did, and I don't recall exactly what they were. My recollection, and you may have just said it, my recollection that Plan Z closed 13 schools.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I'm trying to reach way back 50 years to. I don't recall, but for some reason, that kind of pops in my mind. 13 schools.
Right. So we talked in the beginning about what the state of education was while busing was taking place. There was some turmoil, certainly outside of the schools. In a couple of schools, there was some turmoil. The thing I remember is there were a lot of rumors in the beginning of what was going to happen. So as you're watching it unfold, and as school system leaders are watching it unfold, I think you all were very vigilant about that and trying to deal with it as it came up, right?
Right. I remember the Westwood area. There was we had some difficulty out there. That was a rather unique place. When South Memphis went into residential areas, went into racial transition, we had a lot of white flight, and those white folks in South Memphis, many of them moved over into the Westwood area. Well, lo and behold, here comes Plan Z, and those white kids are going to be upset again. They're going to be bussed out. Some more black kids bussed in, and they bailed on us. And that's sort of the way the South Haven sort of got its start in Mississippi. A lot of those folks had been, because of the racial transition in communities, felt they had lost their neighborhood, and away they went. Mm-hmm. So then what white kids stayed, there was some tension in the schools between some black kids and white kids. There may have been in other schools. My memory doesn't serve me well right now. I'm trying to remember. Mm-hmm. I just don't remember, but I do remember the Westwood area.
All right. So what was the school system's instructions, or how did you tell school administrators to deal with this?
Well, That wasn't within my purview.
Okay.
I can only react to the personnel that we had at the Board of Education were good, strong people in the area of pupil services, and we had people like Johnny Watson, who later became superintendent. Johnny was providing some leadership in that area. Edgar Jacobs and W.W. Davis, and there was just the notion was we were going to have some no nonsense schools. We didn't tolerate cussing teachers. We didn't tolerate fighting, and you were going to be out of the school system if that happened. So the rules were laid down in a very understandable way. We just don't tolerate that kind of behavior. But we had some people that were good. We were also at that time we had the four decentralized areas: the North area, South area, and so forth. And we had assistant superintendents in those areas that handled it well. In the South, particularly in the Southwest, we had Callie Stevens, and she was a strong, tough gal. I tell you, she took care of those kind of problems.
Right. Yeah, I came to cover Miss Stevens later on when I started doing this, probably in the mid-'70s, and she was a very strong administrator, very, very adept at what needed to be done.
We had Joe Westbrook, we had Bill Payne, we had Gene Owles. They were good, strong people.
Mm-hmm. And veteran educators too. I mean, the experience really came through with that they had been in the classrooms. They knew what they were doing.
They did. And above all, I think, is we had a strong superintendent. And Judge McRae in his book acknowledged that we were fortunate in having a leader like John Freeman. John was a no-nonsense fella, but he was very fair, and we protected Freeman a whole lot. He was the one that was going to have to implement the initial Plan Z, and we protected him because a lot of us took some blows, but John was one that was going to have to make it work, and he did.
Mm-hmm. And he actually got the assignment because Superintendent E.C. Stembert had originally been the superintendent going into this and into the court cases, and then he left.
He was superintendent during the faculty desegregation.
Okay,
and then he departed. Stembert became State Commissioner of Education, and I'm trying to think who the governor was. I don't recall who named him, but he didn't.
I think it would have been Blanton, Ray Blanton.
It was Ray Blanton.
Mm-hmm.
Stembert did not have a very. He had a rocky road as state superintendent, and he didn't last too long.
Right.
Then we got a good, strong man in Freeman.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel like there was kind of interference from adults in what the environment was at the schools because there was so much political opposition?
Yes, land is. Do you remember them burying the school bus over at Fairgrounds?
Yes.
And I can't. Citizens Against Busing was a group. I believe that was. Mm-hmm. I can't remember the name of the lady.
Had a ton of yard signs in some parts of the city saying happiness is a neighborhood school.
No, the patrons of the schools didn't smooth the way for us at all. It was lots of opposition.
Mm-hmm. A final point. From talking with classmates, from talking with people who were students at that particular time, what I've heard the most, I think, is that they've said, well, we, as students, we didn't really know what the technical goals were. We knew the goal was desegregation, and that happened for those of us who participated in it. But they also have told me that they feel like being a part of it contributed to a better understanding by them on an individual level. Is that a valid success in this, that people feel like they turned out to be able to handle things better in terms in racial terms, apart from the lofty goals of having a desegregated school system? Is that a valid success?
I think so. I can cite my own children. They were students going through the school system about this time. One of them, the one that's now superintendent of the Bartlett school system, came a little later. He came a little later, but my own kids went to the desegregated schools, and are better because of it. I think they would tell you they're better because of it. A better understanding of other people in this world. I think they would say that also.
Mm-hmm. All right. We have been talking with Dr. O.Z. Stevens about Plan Z 50 years later. I'm Bill Dries. This is the Daily Memphian.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.